Investment irregularities.
Investment irregularities.
My investors knew exactly.
Once is a mistake, twice is suspicious. Charn Guman did this to at least 15 investors across 19 years and left a paper trail of forged documents for every single one.
What they were getting into, they signed all the documents.
$8 million collected from at least 15 investors with $1 million paid back using money from other investors.
Those people understood the risk.
25 years, $8 million. 15 private investors who handed him their retirement savings, their inheritance money, the proceeds from selling family homes. One licensed Ontario mortgage broker operating out of 2 storefronts in downtown Guelph. By the time the Guelph Police Service finally walked him out in handcuffs, he was 73 years old. His brokerage license had been revoked twice by 2 separate provincial regulators, and every single dollar of interest he had ever paid back to an investor was somebody else's principal money. The forged documents alone would produce 22 separate criminal counts. The investigation that put him in those handcuffs had been running for 8 years. Quick question before we get into this one. Would you know how to verify that a licensed mortgage broker was actually putting your money into a real mortgage? Most people don't. Drop a comment and tell me honestly. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. We cover white-collar accountability cases that mainstream news won't touch. Charn Guman was born in March of 1947 in a small village in the Hoshiarpur district of Punjab, in what was then the brand new and bloodied territory of post-partition India. His father was a Jat Sikh farmer who owned roughly 14 acres of irrigated land outside the village, and his mother managed the household and the seasonal grain stores. Charn was the second of 4 sons. The family was not wealthy by Canadian standards, but in their corner of Punjab they were considered established, land-owning, educated enough to read a newspaper, respected at the Gurdwara. The single childhood detail that everyone in his extended family later remembered was the ledger. His father kept a hand-bound cloth ledger in the front room of the house, recording every loan made to a neighbor, every seasonal advance against the wheat harvest, every shared expense at the Gurdwara. Charn was the son who was allowed to fetch it. By the time he was 11, he was the one entering the figures in pencil under his father's supervision. Ledgers, accounts, the formal recording of who owed what to whom, those things were familiar to him before he was 12 years old. He finished secondary school in Punjab in 1965 and enrolled at a college in Jalandhar, where he completed a Bachelor of Commerce in 1969. He worked for 2 years as a junior clerk in a cooperative bank branch in Phagwara, where he learned how mortgages on agricultural land were registered with the District Revenue Office. That work taught him something he would carry the rest of his life, that the paperwork mattered more than the property. A field of wheat could be valued at whatever the seller and the buyer agreed it was worth, but the mortgage charge filed with the Revenue Office was the only thing the bank could enforce. The document was the asset. The land was almost incidental. In the autumn of 1972, he boarded an Air India flight from Delhi to London and a connecting flight to Toronto. He arrived in Canada at the age of 25 with a single suitcase, the equivalent of about 800 Canadian dollars in his pocket, and the name of a distant cousin in a Toby Coke. The cousin had a couch. Charn slept on it for 14 weeks while he looked for work. He took the first job he was offered, overnight shifts at a packaging plant in Mississauga, $8.40 an hour, 3 12-hour shifts plus 1 8-hour shift per week. He worked there for nearly 4 years, sending money home to Punjab every month and saving the rest in a passbook account at the Bank of Montreal branch on Dixon Road. In 1976, he married a woman named Surinder, the daughter of family friends from a neighboring village, in a small ceremony at the Ontario Khalsa Darbar Gurdwara. Sharinder had come to Canada the year before to work as a seamstress in a garment shop on Spadina. They moved into a basement apartment in Rexdale and began the long, careful work of building a Canadian life. Their first son, Davinder, was born in 1978. Their daughter, Harpreet, was born in 1981. By the time the second child arrived, they had saved enough to put a down payment on a narrow semi-detached house on a cul-de-sac in North Etobicoke. The mortgage was through Royal Trust. Charn paid it down 2 years ahead of schedule. He did not go straight into real estate. He spent 4 years selling life insurance for a now-defunct agency on Bloor Street, building a client base inside the Indo-Canadian community in the Western GTA. He earned a series of small certifications. He took night classes at Humber College in business administration. He developed a reputation as the man you went to if you needed someone who would explain a contract in Punjabi over a cup of tea before you signed it. His clients trusted him because he was patient. He never seemed in a hurry. He always brought the documents in a leather portfolio and laid them out on the kitchen table, 1 page at a time. In 1986, he obtained his Ontario real estate license. In 1989, he wrote and passed the mortgage broker's course at Seneca College and was registered as a mortgage broker under the Mortgage Brokers Act. The certificate is dated June 14, 1989. That is the date that, 2.5 decades later, the Real Estate Council of Ontario would identify as the start of the 25-year window, referenced in the criminal disclosure. He was 42 years old. He had 2 children in high school. He had a paid-off house, and he had just been handed a regulated license that allowed him to raise money from private investors and lend it out as mortgages. In 1991, the Guman family sold the Etobicoke house and moved west on Highway 401 to Guelph. The reason was practical. Guelph's housing market was a fraction of Toronto's. The Sikh community there was small but growing, and the city was small enough that a single broker with the right reputation could plausibly become the broker for an entire community. He opened his first office on the 2nd floor above a dry cleaner on Wyndham Street. The plaque beside the door said Human Mortgage Services in white vinyl letters. His evaluations from the Independent Mortgage Brokers Association of Ontario that first year described him as detail-oriented, methodical, and trusted within his community of origin. 3 years later, when he incorporated the operation as SuperChoice Real Estate Limited, the FSCO file referenced him as a broker who maintains complete and orderly client documentation. That was the pivot. The orderly documentation. He had been keeping ledgers since he was 11 years old. To understand what Charn Guman did, you have to understand how a private mortgage in Ontario is supposed to work. A licensed mortgage broker, like the kind Guman became in 1989, is permitted under the Mortgage Brokerages, Lenders, and Administrators Act to do 2 things that an ordinary person cannot do. First, the broker can solicit funds from private investors for the express purpose of lending those funds out as mortgage loans. Second, the broker can register a charge against a real property, that is, file a mortgage against a piece of land, as security for the investor's loan. In theory, the system is simple. The investor, a retiree, a small business owner, a member of the broker's community with savings to deploy, gives money to the broker. The broker lends that money to a borrower who needs a mortgage. The borrower's property is pledged as security through a charge registered against the title in the Ontario Land Registry. The investor receives monthly interest payments funded by the borrower's monthly payments. At maturity, the borrower refinances or sells the property, and the investor receives the principal back. The protections in this system are paper-based. The investor's security exists because somewhere in a provincial registry there is a document, a charge against a real piece of real property that ties the investor's money to a tangible asset. If the broker disappears, the charge remains. The investor can foreclose. The investor can sell the property at sheriff's auction. The investor can recover, unless the charge is not real, unless the document filed with the registry is forged, unless the borrower does not exist, or the property is not encumbered, or the registration was altered after the fact, or the so-called mortgage is simply a piece of paper signed by the broker himself with no enforceable legal weight whatsoever. In the period Guman operated, the Financial Services Commission of Ontario was the principal regulator of mortgage brokerages. FSCO was an administrative body. Its tools were license reviews, audits, and the power to revoke a broker's registration. It was not an investigator of fraud. It did not have subpoena power over banks. It did not match deposits to disbursements. The Real Estate Council of Ontario regulated real estate brokerages and salespersons. RECO had similar limitations. Both agencies relied heavily on broker self-reporting. Both agencies took years to act on complaints that did arrive, and neither agency was permitted, in the period in question, to share investigative files with police in real time. The vulnerability was the paperwork. Investors who handed over six-figure checks in exchange for what they believed were registered mortgage charges almost never went to the land registry and checked. Why would they? Their broker was licensed. Their broker was a member of the community. Their broker had been recommended by the same uncle or family friend or Gurdwara contact who had recommended every other professional in their life. The trust framework was not built on registry verification. It was built on the broker's name, and Charnguman's name, by 1995, was very good. The first investor check deposited into a SuperChoice account that the Guelph Police Service would later allege was fraudulent was for $47,000. It was deposited on a Tuesday in March of 1995. The investor was a 62-year-old widow named Helen Pritchard, who had recently sold a small bungalow in Rockwood and was looking for a place to put the proceeds. A friend at her bridge club had recommended a mortgage broker in Guelph who paid 8% interest on first mortgage investments. She drove to the office above the dry cleaner on Wyndham Street with a bank draft made out to SuperChoice Real Estate Limited. Guman met her in his small, wood-paneled office. He explained the structure of the investment in simple, patient language. The $47,000 would be combined with two other investor contributions to fund a $180,000 first mortgage on a residential property in Cambridge. The borrower had been vetted. The property was conservatively valued. The charge would be registered against the title in her name as one of 3 named mortgagees. She would receive monthly interest payments by check at her home address. The checks arrived every month for 5 years. Helen Pritchard would tell investigators in 2013 that she had received approximately $19,000 in interest payments over those 5 years before the original principal was returned to her, so she could roll it into a new investment. She trusted Guman completely by then. She rolled the principal. She invested again. She brought her sister. The mortgage on the Cambridge property never existed. The Cambridge property in question was owned outright by a retired school teacher who had paid her mortgage off in 1989. There was no encumbrance registered against the title. There never had been. The borrower Guman had described to Helen Pritchard did not exist. The 8% monthly interest payments she received for 5 years were funded entirely by deposits from later investors, a Punjabi Canadian small business owner in Kitchener, a retired engineer in Fergus, a contractor in Cambridge, who each believed that their own money was being deployed into different first mortgage investments on different properties with different borrowers. The method was clinical. Guman did not invent the Ponzi structure. He simply industrialized the paperwork that disguised it. For each new investor, he prepared a binder. The binder contained a mortgage commitment letter on SuperChoice letterhead, a property appraisal sometimes obtained legitimately from a third-party appraiser and sometimes drafted on his office computer, a draft charge document patterned exactly on the standard Ontario form, and what appeared to be a confirmation of registration from the land registry, stamped with the appropriate file number. Of the 22 utter forged document counts eventually filed against him, 18 related to documents in those binders. The other 4 related to alterations to legitimate property documents in cases where a real registration did exist, but the named mortgagee, the principal amount, or the priority of the charge had been altered after the fact. He escalated slowly. The early investments were modest, $30,000, $50,000, $75,000. The interest payments were generous enough to be attractive, but not so generous as to alarm a cautious investor. He paid out for years before he had to displace. By 1998, he had at least 9 investors in the rotation, and the monthly cycle of new deposits funding old interest payments had become routine. In 2002, he opened the storefront at 268 Waterloo Avenue. In 2007, he added the second location at 715 Wellington Street. The second office gave him a separate brand for what he called institutional placement, larger investor contributions, sometimes from the small holding companies of GTA-based business owners who wanted to deploy $100,000 or $200,000 at a time. The largest single contribution the Guelph Police Service would later document was $495,000 from a single investor who had sold a small commercial building in Brampton and was looking for a tax-efficient short-term placement. The lifestyle signs that should have triggered scrutiny were carefully suppressed. Guman drove a 4-year-old Buick. The family still lived in the same 2-story brick house on the same Guelph Crescent they had bought in 1992. His son was at the University of Waterloo. His daughter was at Western. The wealth was not visible. What he did spend appeared inside the structure of the scheme itself. Quarterly trips to Punjab to manage what he told family was inherited land, gold jewelry purchased in installments and stored in a safe deposit box at a Scotiabank branch on Stone Road, and a series of small wire transfers to an account in the UAE that the RCMP would later examine and decline to pursue. The internal checks that should have caught him did not exist. FSCO inspected SuperChoice's books twice between 1997 and 2010. Both inspections were limited in scope. The inspectors reviewed the firm's broker conduct policies and a sample of completed mortgage files. They did not match deposits to disbursements. They did not pull title searches against the registered charges. They did not contact investors directly. They certified the file each time. The audit certificates from 2003 and 2008 sit in the disclosure binder as exhibits, proof in court that the regulator had been there, looked, and walked away. The man who started the unraveling was a 68-year-old retired engineer named Walter Kreisge, who had invested $42,000 with Guman in 2008 and another $75,000 in 2010. In the spring of 2012, he received a letter from SuperChoice informing him that the mortgage on his 2010 investment was being extended at his existing rate for a further 3-year term, and that the monthly interest payments would continue uninterrupted. Walter Kreisge had spent 38 years as an electrical engineer for Ontario Hydro. He had a habit, born of professional discipline, of cross-checking the assertions made in any business document he signed. He drove to the Wellington County Land Registry Office in May of 2012 and asked for a copy of the charge registered against the property his investment funds were allegedly secured against. The property was in Acton. The registry clerk searched the title. She found no charge in Walter Kresge's name. She found no charge in the name of Superchoice Real Estate Limited. She found no second mortgage of any kind on the property at the address Guman had given him. Kresge drove home. He pulled the binder Guman had given him in 2010 out of the filing cabinet in his basement. He read every page. The registry confirmation slip in the binder, with its file number and registry office stamp, looked exactly like the legitimate registry confirmation he had just been given for the Acton property. The file numbers were even formatted correctly. But the document in his binder did not exist in the actual registry. He spent the weekend at his kitchen table comparing every document. By Monday, he was certain. Walter Kresge did not confront Guman. He did not call Superchoice. He did one thing first. He sat down at his computer and drafted a 6-page typed memo summarizing what he had given, what he had been promised, what the registry actually showed, and what his interest payments had been over the 4 years. He attached scanned copies of every document from his binder. He printed 3 copies. He kept one in his basement safe. He gave one to his wife to keep at her sister's house in Mississauga. He drove the 3rd copy to the front desk of the Guelph Police Service at 15 Wyndham Street South and asked to speak to a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit. Detective Constable Daniel Bowering took the meeting. Bowering was 41 years old, had spent 12 years on the Guelph force, and had been assigned to financial crime for just under 3 years. He read Walter Kresge's memo at his desk while Kresge sat across from him. He asked 3 questions. He thanked Kresge. He filed a preliminary occurrence report that afternoon. Within 6 weeks, he had been contacted by 2 additional Guman investors who, after hearing rumors at a Sikh community function in Brampton, had performed their own registry searches and found the same thing. Guelph Police Service opened a formal investigation in late 2012. The investigation would take 8 years. We're heading into the part of this story where the paperwork finally catches up to him. Before we get there, if you've made it this far, you already know this channel covers cases the mainstream press never finds. Subscribe so the next one shows up in your feed. The verdict in this one took longer than you'd believe. The Guelph Police Service investigation that ran from late 2012 through July of 2020 was, by the standards of small municipality financial crime units, enormous. The lead investigator throughout was Detective Constable Bowering, who was promoted to Detective Sergeant in 2016 and stayed on the file. He was supported at various points by 2 other officers, a forensic accountant on contract from a Toronto firm, and a series of liaison officers from FSCO, and later the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario. The first 18 months of the investigation were spent identifying victims. This was the hardest part. Guman had no centralized client list that investors could be drawn from. There was no Superchoice newsletter, no annual investor meeting, no public marketing list. The clients had come to him through word of mouth, through Gurdwara contacts, through the bridge clubs of rural Wellington County, through the small business networks of Guelph and Cambridge and Kitchener. Some had been investors for 15 years and had never met another investor. They believed they were the only one. Bowering's team obtained production orders for the bank records of SuperChoice's 3 operating accounts and Guman's 2 personal accounts. They obtained matching production orders for the bank accounts of every investor they identified. They began the patient forensic work of matching deposits to disbursements. The pattern emerged over the second year of the investigation. Every interest payment to every investor, going back to the earliest records available from the banks in 1998, was demonstrably funded, within days, sometimes within hours, by a deposit from another investor. The total figure the forensic accountant arrived at was approximately $8 million in investor principal, raised between March 1995 and the final deposit in November 2014. Of that, approximately $1 million and $93,000 had been returned to investors in the form of interest payments. Approximately $1,800,000 had been returned as principal repayments to early investors whose contributions had been rolled or terminated. The remaining roughly $5 million was unaccounted for through the operating accounts and had moved through a combination of cash withdrawals, the UAE wire transfers, the gold purchases, and a series of property transactions in Punjab that the RCMP confirmed but did not pursue. The physical evidence search occurred in October of 2017. Guelph police executed a search warrant on both SuperChoice storefronts and on the Guman family home simultaneously. From the Wellington Street office, they seized 17 bankers' boxes of client files. From the Waterloo Avenue office, they seized 11 additional boxes, plus the office desktop computers and a Lexmark laser printer that the forensic team would later match through a microscopic toner residue analysis to 41 of the forged registry confirmation slips. From the family home, they seized 1 fireproof safe containing approximately $96,000 in cash, an inventory of safe deposit box receipts, and a hand-bound cloth ledger. The ledger was the smoking gun. It was a cheap cloth-bound notebook, the kind sold at any stationer in Punjab for the equivalent of $2 Canadian, with lined pages and a red cloth spine. The first entry was dated March 14, 1995. The final entry was dated November 22, 2014. The ledger contained, in Guman's neat handwritten Gurmukhi and English mixed notation, the complete record of every investor check he had ever received and every interest payment he had ever sent out. Each entry was cross-referenced: an investor's name, the date of deposit, the amount, and beside it in a separate column, the names and amounts of the other investors whose deposits had been used to fund that investor's most recent interest payment. It was not a fraud journal. It was a bookkeeper's journal. He had kept it the way his father had kept the family ledger in Hoshiarpur. He had kept it because that was simply how he organized accounts. He had kept it for 19 years. The digital evidence reinforced the ledger. The SuperChoice office computers contain the source files for the forged registry confirmation slips, saved under file names that reference the investor's surname and the year. Emails between Guman and 3 investors who had asked for follow-up documentation included attachments that were time-stamped within minutes of the email being sent. Proof that the documents were being generated on demand rather than pulled from a legitimate archive. One email exchange with an investor named Patricia LeMay, who had asked in 2011 for a copy of the registry confirmation slip for her 2009 investment, showed the relevant Word file being created on Guman's computer at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday and emailed to her at 11:53 p.m. the same evening. LeMay, October 14, 2011. Charn, my accountant is asking for the registry confirmation for the Acton property mortgage. Can you send me a copy at your convenience? Guman, Ihnen, October 14th, 2011. Of course, Patricia, I will pull it from the file tomorrow morning and send it across. Apologies for the delay. We are very busy this week. Guman, October 14th, 2011, 11:53 p.m. Patricia, please find attached. Let me know if your accountant needs anything further. The file metadata showed the document had been created 6 minutes earlier, never saved to an archive, never opened from a stored location. By the spring of 2019, Bowering had interviewed 23 investors. 15 had become formal complainants. The forensic accountant had completed her analysis. The Crown had a draft information ready. The only reason the arrest did not happen sooner was that the Crown wanted to ensure that each forgery count was supported by a discrete, individually prosecutable document, and the cross-matching of documents to file metadata to bank records took an additional year. The information was finally sworn on July 16, 2020. The arrest warrant was signed the same afternoon. On the morning of July 20th, 2020, Detective Sergeant Bowering and 2 uniformed constables walked into the Wellington Street storefront at 10:42 a.m. The storefront was technically closed. Guman had not been operating SuperChoice as an active brokerage since the FSCO revocation in 2014, but he still came to the office most weekday mornings to handle his personal correspondence and to keep up the appearance, to his family and his community, that he was still a working professional. He was seated at his desk reading the Globe and Mail when Bowering entered. He looked up. He recognized Bowering. They had spoken on the phone twice in 2014 and once in person in 2016. Guman set down the newspaper. "Mr. Guman, I have a warrant for your arrest. The charges are listed on this document. I'm going to read them to you now. Please sit down. May I see the warrant?" "You may, sir, in a moment. I need to read you the charges first. You are charged with 22 counts of uttering a forged document, contrary to Section 368 of the Criminal Code. You are charged with 4 counts of using a forged document. You are charged with 4 counts of fraud over $5,000, contrary to Section 380. You are charged with 1 count of mischief in relation to data, contrary to Section 430. I understand. You have the right to retain and instruct counsel without delay. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say may be used in evidence. Do you understand the charges as I have read them, sir?" "Yes, I understand." "Do you wish to speak to a lawyer?" "Yes, I will speak to my lawyer." He was patient throughout. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He asked twice if he could call his wife before leaving the office. Bowering told him he could call her from the station. He nodded. When the constable stood him up to apply the handcuffs, he asked Bowering one question. The exchange was captured on Bowering's body-worn camera, which had been activated at the threshold of the storefront and recorded the entire arrest. "Detective, the investigation. Has it been long?" 8 years, sir." 8 years, I see. Step around the desk, please." Guman stepped around the desk. He held his wrists together in front of him. Bowering applied the handcuffs and walked him to the front of the storefront. A small crowd of pedestrians had gathered on the Wellington Street sidewalk. Guman did not look at them. He looked at the pavement directly in front of his feet. He was placed in the back of a Guelph police cruiser and driven to the station for processing. Those were the last words he spoke in public about the case. From that morning forward, every statement attributed to Charn Guman would come through his counsel. Guman's first court appearance was on November 3, 2020, by video link from the Wellington County Courthouse in Guelph. He appeared briefly and was released on a recognizance with conditions. No contact with any of the 15 named complainants. No involvement in any mortgage or real estate transaction in any capacity, and surrender of his passport. He was represented by Sarah Mendelsohn, a Toronto criminal defense lawyer who specialized in white-collar prosecutions. The case did not move quickly. The disclosure binder, when it was finally produced in full by the Crown, ran to approximately 14,000 pages. The forensic accountant's report alone was 340 pages. The bank records spanned 19 years. Mendelsohn requested and received 4 separate extensions for the defense to complete its review. The preliminary inquiry was held in stages across the spring and early summer of 2022. The Crown called 9 of the 15 complainants. Walter Kreska was the first witness. He testified for an entire day and a half, walking the court through his original 2012 registry search, the discrepancy with his superchoice binder, the day he drove the memo to the Guelph police station. Helen Pritchard testified the following week. She was 89 years old by then and testified from a wheelchair. She told the court that the $47,000 she had given Guman in 1995 represented the entirety of the proceeds from the sale of the bungalow in Rockwood, which she and her husband had owned for 31 years. Her husband had died the year before she sold it. She had given the check to Guman because she trusted him. At the conclusion of the preliminary inquiry, the presiding justice committed Guman to stand trial on all 31 counts. The trial was set for the autumn of 2023. In the months leading up to it, Mendelsohn negotiated extensively with the Crown. The negotiations were public knowledge in the Wellington County legal community. The Crown's position, set out in court filings, was that the case for the documentary forgery counts was overwhelming, and that a contested trial would yield convictions on the majority of the 31 charges. The defense position, set out in a series of pretrial motions, was that the elderly accused was prepared to acknowledge financial responsibility for the harm caused, would consent to a global restitution order in favor of the complainants, and would enter pleas to a reduced set of charges in exchange for a recommendation of a custodial sentence shorter than what a contested conviction would yield. In October of 2023, Charn Guman entered guilty pleas to 7 counts, 4 counts of fraud over $5,000 and 3 counts of uttering a forged document. The remaining 24 counts were withdrawn in exchange for the pleas. The agreed statement of facts read into the court ran to 31 pages. The sentencing hearing was held in February of 2024, before Justice Marianne Holcomb of the Ontario Superior Court of Justice in Guelph. The Crown sought a sentence of 6 years in a federal penitentiary plus a restitution order in the amount of $4,700,000, representing the unrepaid investor principal. The defense sought a sentence of 3 years on the basis of Guman's age, his lack of any prior criminal record, his guilty pleas, and his consent to a restitution order in the amount sought by the Crown. The victim impact statements were read into the record across 2 full days. 11 of the 15 complainants spoke or had their statements read on their behalf. Walter Kreska spoke briefly. He said he was not angry. He said he was tired. He said he had spent 12 years of his retirement on this case, and he wanted to go home and not think about it anymore. Helen Pritchard's statement was read by her daughter. It was 4 sentences long. He came to my house. He drank tea at my kitchen table. He told me he would treat my money the way he would treat his own mother's. That was a lie that took 29 years to be named. Justice Holcomb delivered her reasons for sentence on the morning of February 14, 2024. She spoke for 40 minutes. She addressed Gooman directly for the final 8. "Mr. Gooman," she said, "you were not a desperate man. You were not an addict. You were not under coercion. You were a licensed professional who held 2 distinct regulated registrations in this province and who used those registrations as a cover for 19 continuous years of theft from people who came to you because they trusted what those registrations meant. The ledger you kept in your home is not the ledger of a man who lost control of a business. It is the ledger of a man who was, every single month for 19 years, fully and completely aware of what he was doing. The most aggravating feature of this case is not the amount of money. It is the duration. You had 19 years to stop. You had 19 years to telephone any one of your investors and tell them the truth. You did not. She sentenced him to 5 years and 6 months in federal custody, with credit of 0 days as he had been on judicial interim release throughout. She imposed a restitution order in the amount of $4,700,000. She imposed a lifetime prohibition on holding any registration or license under any provincial financial services statute. She ordered the seized cash and the gold inventory forfeited to the Crown for partial satisfaction of the restitution order. He was taken into custody from the courtroom that afternoon. He was processed at the Maplehurst Correctional Complex in Milton on a federal transfer holding warrant and was transferred within 3 weeks to Beaver Creek Institution, a minimum security federal facility in Gravenhurst that houses approximately 300 male inmates, and that has historically been used for non-violent offenders, older inmates, and white-collar prisoners. He will be eligible for full parole in February of 2026. The restitution order will, in practice, never be satisfied. The forensic accountant testified at sentencing that the seized cash, the gold inventory, and the recoverable property interests in Canada and the UAE together represent approximately $280,000 of recoverable value against a restitution debt of $4,700,000. The investors will receive approximately 6 cents on each dollar of unrepaid principal. Walter Kresge will receive approximately $7,000 against a loss of $117,000. Helen Pritchard, who died of pneumonia at her daughter's home in Mississauga 11 weeks after the sentencing hearing, will receive nothing. The Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario, which absorbed FSCO's mortgage broker supervisory function in 2019, published a brief case summary on its website in April of 2024, referencing the Gooman matter as an example of the need for enhanced supervisory tools in the private mortgage sector. The summary did not mention that FSCO had inspected SuperChoice twice during the period in question and certified the file each time. The summary did not mention that 8 years had elapsed between the first investor complaint and the criminal charges. The summary did not mention Helen Pritchard. The storefront at 715 Wellington Street is, as of this recording, a vape shop. The storefront at 268 Waterloo Avenue is empty, and the brown paper is still taped to the inside of the window. The plaque that read Super Choice Real Estate Ltd. Was removed by the building's new owner in 2021 and is, according to a former employee of the building, in a cardboard box in the basement storage room, along with a stack of unrecycled business cards bearing the name and licensed broker number of Charn Singh Guman, who began registering mortgage charges in the province of Ontario in June of 1989, and whose final forged document was uttered in November of 2014. This case was patient, 25 years of patience. But the case on your screen right now made even Guelph's 8-year investigation look fast. Click it.